Hello everyone to another session by the product folks. I'm Aditya and I have Shalini with me to host the event tonight. And thanks for joining, especially on a Saturday night. We know you must have had a long week, so thanks for staying up and deciding to learn while others aren't. So we definitely hope to make it worth your time, and we have an exciting session lined up for tonight. But before we jump into that, just a quick intro about the product folks for folks who are attending our events for the first time. Product Works is a volunteer-driven community for product managers, marketers, designers, and basically everyone interested in product. Apart from conducting such masterclasses and workshops, we are doing Insurgo, which I'm sure a lot of you must be a part of. And I hope you are liking the sessions. If not, just let us know, and we'll definitely make it better for you. If you're looking out for jobs, we have an open job board on our website, which you can go and check out, and you'll find tons of companies, startups hiring out of India and outside. So do definitely check that out. If you're a senior PM and if you're looking out for good opportunities, just email us to hiring@theproductfolks.com. I will put it in the chat and we'll help you find a good opportunity. So that's pretty much it. Lots of initiatives lined up on our website, so make sure you check that out. And if you enjoyed this session, do give us a shout out on Twitter. With that, I'll be handing it over to Shalini to talk about the session and our speaker for today.
Thanks, Adi. So, hi everyone. Regarding today's session, digital experience is undeniably tied to business results, and digital companies today have to contend with multiple variables to ensure optimal experiences. So, our speaker for today is Rohit Ramesh. He is the Vice President, Pre Sales and Solution Engineering at Headspin, an alumni of Santa Clara University. He is deeply passionate about improving the user experience and playing Indian classical drums. So, Rohit believes that in performance and experience, no one size would fit all, and it's a journey to get to the best customer experience that needs to be looked every time there is a change and update to applications. And in this session, Rohit will share with us how to get enhanced application performance, increased user engagement, reduce time to market, and improve business continuity, and higher productivity for development teams. So, tech folks, this is especially for you. Now I'll hand it over to Rohit. Rohit, the stage is all yours.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aditya and Shalini. So, thank you for having us. Love to meet you all. It's a great forum. I can see a lot of enthusiasm and with all the great stuff that is going on. Yeah. So, without further delay, I think we talked about myself, but I think where I come from is Headspin, and what we do at Headspin is we're a digital experience AI platform. Just to understand what we do at Headspin with an example, right? So we have customers like Tinder, Google, Facebook. So what we do for them is that, for example, there is, let's take the example of Google, right? So they're developing their apps in a few locations, let's say San Francisco, India, right? Maybe UK. But the customers that use Google are all around the world, and they're present in a whole bunch of countries and different locations, devices, networks, OS versions, so on and so forth. Now, how do they know how is the experience like for a real user who's sitting in different parts of the world? So that's where we come in as Headspin, where we give access to these real Android and iOS devices that are sitting in all these different countries, and now remotely they can access all these devices, run manual testing, automation testing, and then at scale. Now, not just run testing, but look at what is the experience looks like in each of these real devices and real networks. So that's where we come in. There's a whole bunch of AI and machine learning that goes into all the data that we collect. So we are basically a data-driven company. That's how I'll be presenting a whole bunch of examples, and hopefully we'll also make it fun and make your Saturday night worth it. and maybe also take a few points back to your work or your real life, right? Cool. So with that, again, thank you for joining today, and I'll be sharing my screen, and then we can get started. And I think as the community rules goes, I guess ideally I would want it to be an interactive session, but given the situation, we're going to you can always post questions on the Q&A section, and then we'll take questions in the end. Yeah, for the next half an hour, it'll be mostly a monologue. So sharing my screen right away. Can you see my screen? Can someone confirm?
Yep, we can
Yes.
see your screen.
Today we'll be talking about digital experience and how do we build such quality digital experiences, and what are the different pitfalls. And I've kind of put in this, which is basically James Bond. I guess for all of you who know James Bond, there's a new movie that's coming up, and as you see, as we go through the presentation, you'll see why I've kind of used this, and we'll talk more about James Bond and Headspin as we go. Just a quick trivia question, maybe you can answer it in your mind. Did you know which was the first ever Bond movie that came out? I'll probably give you 5 seconds to think, or without Googling, of course, for all the James Bond fans out there. Aren't we all James Bond fans? Any guesses?
Lots of them coming in chat. Doctor No.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I guess people asking this question, I guess. Yeah, it is Doctor No. That was the first James Bond movie that really came out. It's pretty interesting for someone who has not actually watched. And that's Sean Connery for you. Okay. So here is the agenda for today. We'll talk about first about quality assurance, right? First, we need to, what is testing and what is conventional testing and what is power testing in today's world. And then we all know what is performance, and I'll kind of give you examples as to why it kind of is so important, even though that it's kind of the elephant in the room. Just to give you context from different examples, we'll talk about why it's really important, and some examples from my own experience. So this is totally from my own experience working with a whole bunch of customers globally, just to get you insights as to what is the experience, what does experience really mean, and what is happening in the real world. And finally, some tips and tricks that you can go back and try it out. Then, of course, we'll do Q&A. So this is conventional testing, right? It's kind of slow and it's kind of boring, right? So what does it really mean is basically when you're doing testing, it's either a pass or a fail. I ran 100 test cases and then I basically get a pass or a fail, and also capture logs and a whole bunch of screenshots. And now when someone looks at it, like say for example, let's say this is very common, and when someone is running a test suite, let's say there are like 1,000 test cases. This is very common for 1,000 test cases. So let's say be optimistic and say even 10% of those test cases fail, right? And now basically the QA team has to go through and sift through the logs, correlate to that screenshots and maybe a video, right? So which is very hard to, which is not very common that people capture. And that's it. So now they have to correlate to the logs and the screenshots and see what exactly happened. Where did the test case fail? Why did it fail? What happened in that particular test case? So it's already very cumbersome. And now imagine when you plug this into your continuous monitoring data pipeline, right? So every time there is a new feature that you integrate, and now you run these 1,000 test cases to see if there are any regressions that came out of it. And 10% meaning now 100 test cases. So you're going and looking at each of those logs and seeing what happened and so on. It's very cumbersome. And this only elevates when you keep running this over every time there's a new feature that gets integrated and every new code that is checked in. So it just goes out of control. And what you've seen with a lot of people that we work with or the customers that we speak to is that, they say, Rohit, no one really looks at those regression test failures, and at some point we just run it for the sake of running it. So, and there are few people who also tell us that, that 20%, 30% failure is okay. We just pass the build. And that's the truth. That's the reality, because it's not very easy to navigate. So fast forward today, what is power testing then? This is the example. If you're looking at, this is an Aston Martin, which has all the controls, which is all the latest and the greatest, where Bond is being walked through, right? So how do we become James Bond of testing? So this is when you capture the entire snapshot of the system, where once you're running testing, you basically capture the entire video recording. There's network capture, and then there is on top of it, once you capture all the network metrics and all the data that comes out of the system, then you apply AI on top of this and apply ML models on top of this, and basically analyze and find out where are these bottlenecks, what is happening, and then come up with insights that really tells you actionable insights, right? So that will go back and tell you that this is exactly what is happening with the failure. This is where your test case failed, and here are all the possible reasons why this is happening. So now this is what that can be interesting or easy for someone from a QA team, or even someone looking at it from a user experience standpoint, can easily navigate and run through all these test cases. So let's go back to that example, right? We were talking about 1,000 test cases and 10% that failed. Let's put that here. And when you say 10% of these test cases fail, now that 100 test cases, now there is a video recording for this particular test. There is network capture. So it's easy to navigate and see what exactly happened in let's say you were going through that particular user journey, and we have context as to what happened at the system level. Ultimately, we are all concerned about user experience, right? So the whole point of why we do testing is ultimately to improve the quality of experience, because gone are those days when we all have a mobile app, web app, and then as far as I'm able to deliver what the customers are looking for, I'm fine. But today there are so many different options, and it's very easy for a developer. It's very easy for an end user to say, this particular game is not fast enough. I'll go and find another equivalent, right? And which is why we see the uninstalls being such a big concerns for app developers today. And the other perspective to this, we were talking about this from a tester's perspective. So let's look at it from a development standpoint and product standpoint, right? So when a QA team really raises a ticket and says that this is an issue that we found during testing, and here are all the issues that were there. Now the development team kind of comes back and says, and give me a recreatable test case, give me that logs, what device did you test on, what network did you test on, what was the context of the system, was the system under load conditions. so many different parameters, right? So there are so many different moving parts, especially when it comes to mobile and web also to some extent. So in that case, when you just create a snapshot and say that, this is the context of this particular test failure, and now please take it, and now you can go from there. So the whole back and forth between testing and the QA team is reduced when the entire snapshot is given. Moving on, so why is it important? So these are all some of the really mostly used apps, right? So if you see here, and we've all at some point experienced this kind of user experience where they just say that, something went wrong. Looks like it's a network problem. I was not able to book a cab. And it's happened to me when I especially travel and you're in a different country and you want to basically get a cab and just get to the meeting, and now suddenly the app says that it's not, something went wrong. I don't know what that something is, right? And this is exactly what we as product folks, we as engineers, or we as developers, QA, whatever, right, to need to kind of think through beforehand and see how to get a view to this particular situation that end users ultimately experience. And this is an example. This is a very famous game. And what you're seeing here is, of course, this is a snapshot of this particular game. And at this particular standpoint, where the user is trying to play this game, if you see, it's just a blank screen, and and the user is just waiting for 3 seconds, just not doing anything. And given the millennials and given the generation who are using, or people are used to fast experience, so this is a really challenging experience. This is another example where we're trying to add an item to the cart, right? And this takes quite a while. All right. So let's go through this understanding of, go through an example and understand the whole root cause analysis through an experience, and what is poor user experience? How do we kind of navigate through this? What does it really mean in the real world? So this is a test for a very popular e-commerce app. It's called Wish, and in this case, we are going through this user journey to book, to basically buy a product. And at this particular point, there's a poor user experience area, which is around 5 seconds, right, where the user is waiting for the app to basically load the home page, just the home page, right? And now the question is, why is it taking 5 seconds? When I tested it in the office, when I was developing the app, it was hardly taking a second or two. Why? Because I was testing on a 1 Gbps connection in the office, right? That's what we do. Or we are testing it under the most best conditions, where we are mostly sitting in the business area, right? So this is what a real user was experiencing. Now, what was happening in this 5 seconds? So these are all the requests that were made. So these are all the network requests that were made in this time interval. If you see the wait times for each of these requests, which is basically to download a whole bunch of assets, whether it is images, REST APIs that are loading a whole bunch of metrics for searching all the products that was there, or whatever, right? So a whole bunch of these network requests are being made. And not to forget, right, so there are a whole bunch of third-party softwares that we all use, and today on an average there are like 16 to 18 third-party libraries and SDKs that are there in mobile apps specifically. And apart from the requests that the app alone makes, so all these other requests from third-party libraries are anyway being made. So they also add to the delay, right? Especially in this case, if you see, the wait times are insanely high, because 2 seconds for each request that is waiting on the server, it's a lot of time. And what does this mean? This means that this particular host, which where majority of the network requests were made, if you see the green bar, which is actually representing the data here, is telling you that majority of the time was spent waiting on the server to get a response. Now, what does that mean? It can be, this can, why, no, sorry, why is that happening? It could be for a few reasons. One is either the server is overloaded, maybe that load balancer is not working as expected, or maybe the users are geographically farther away from where your backend server is actually sitting. So when you really look at the data from this particular standpoint, so you exactly know what is happening under the hood, right? So so this is, if you go back to this particular slide, right, where we started with a user experience bottleneck and said, this is taking 5 seconds, and now we did root cause analysis and said these are all the network requests that were being made in this particular time interval. So majority of the requests are coming from this particular host, and we said, now let us look at this host specifically. And in this case, if you see that the average wait time is like 400 milliseconds. So that's quite a while. And there were like 100 requests in total. So there is numbers and there is a lot of wait time. So this is another example as to what happens under the hood. When we say the app is slow, or my app takes 5 seconds for it to load. My search time is like 15 seconds. My add to cart is 5 seconds. We all have these questions, and this is probably the most common question that we have, that people ask us, that we see that spinner whenever there is a video that is loading. If it's an OTT app, if it's a bank app, it says I'm trying to make a transfer, and it just takes it just takes 10 seconds, 15 seconds. I mean, I've used some of these banking apps, and then I keep waiting for minutes. So I mean, I don't have a choice, right? You can't change a bank overnight. So, but the experience, ultimately, if it is that bad, that at some point we'll have to switch, right? So anyway, so coming back to this examples, on to answer all these questions, there are, as I said, as we were discussing initially, right? So user experience, performance is not a one size fits all, right? It doesn't. There is no silver bullet to it. There's a whole bunch of things that needs to be done, or it's a continuous process. When we talk about CI/CD, I'll tell you more. It's a continuous process, and we need to look at different things. So coming back to this example of duplicate messages. So what is happening here is that with the same example of application that I showed you, in this case, there is a circle, right? If you see, there is a circle and there is a square, and both of them are in green. I don't know if you can make a difference of color, but these are the same colors where I'm pointing to. And in this case, they're actually downloading the same asset, meaning they're downloading the same image twice. Why? So you see, this is the request which is downloading this particular image, and this is the request that is downloading the same image. It's the same URL, it's the same link, but it's just getting downloaded twice. We all have this question, right? I'm sure you guys are thinking, which is what I also thought when I saw this first. Why would someone download the same image twice in the same session? And that too in not too far, right? It's the same time, almost the same time interval, because this is a time series data. So and at this particular point, it was actually downloading it twice. And if you see similar squares and circles, they're actually downloading at almost the same time. Right? Why are they down? Why are they doing it? I mean, it kind of doesn't sound very intuitive, right? Why do we download it twice? It's quite a secret, I would say. And because James Bond says you only live twice. I don't know. Have you guys watched this movie which is Do You Only Live Twice? It's again a Sean Connery movie. It's a good one if you've not watched. But anyway, coming back to our uh, top secret, it kind of lies if you go deeper and see what was happening in that particular request. It's actually using this networking library. So if it gets too technical, folks, you can just ignore. I'll make it simple. But it's actually the issue is with this particular networking library, which is OKHTTP, right? And what happens with this particular library is when the networks, right? So when the networks are really unreliable, so the way it is built is that it silently does retries, and just because it's tensed and it wants to make sure that it downloads, and it's downloading it twice. So it does retries in the background so that whatever happens, I want to deliver this request, deliver this image to the user. In summary, what happened? We were looking at this particular example where the images were getting downloaded twice. Images being downloaded twice, meaning when you download twice, there is a round trip to the server, meaning this particular image is sitting on somewhere in the server. You're downloading it to the user. Now, when you download it twice, of course, it's going to take some time, and which is going to delay what the user is going to see. So it's going to take some time. So why is it taking time? It's because it's using this particular library, which is doing silently retries when the networks are unreliable. And this is not very uncommon, by the way, because when someone is using the app on a phone, there are many situations where the networks are flaky, right? So we're all watching YouTube, or we're streaming some content on Netflix or Prime, whatever, right? Hotstar, whatever you guys are. You would have seen that spinners come on every so often, right? Why does that happen? Because it's trying to get the data which is from this server, and the network is just not doesn't have that much of bandwidth, or it's just weak. So in this case, it just silently does retries. Now, moving on to the example number 3, from Russia with love. But maybe I should have changed it to from US with love, or United States with love. I'll tell you why. This was also another amazing movie. So you guys should check this out as well. And coming to this example, which is DNS, which is domain name service. I'll make it simple, but I just put the data out there so that everyone gets a context as to what is happening under the hood. So we saw this kind of UI where of poor user experience, and the request taking time. There is wait times which are like 6 seconds, 8 seconds, and so on, right? It's a whole, like, really get a small API request, it's taking 6 seconds. So which is what kind of made me curious. And by the way, this test was done in Bangalore on a Airtel network. And look at the time to connect to this particular server. So it's in seconds, not even milliseconds. Usually the general situation is that the round trips are in hundreds of milliseconds. Usually, that's kind of 100 milliseconds, 200. That's generally the acceptable time, because you can't really go beyond physics, right? So someone just cannot have a server right next to where the user is. So quite close to wherever they are. Anyway, so this was the IP address, meaning this is where the server was located. So did a quick geolocation lookup and said, my user is in Bangalore. Which server is it connecting to? It's connecting to a US based California, San Francisco server. Now look at this example, which is I have my user who's sitting in India, but the server is in US. So every time I ask for some content, so I have to go all the way to the other part of the world and then get 10 kilobytes of data, even a small 10 kilobyte data, and then come back to India. Round trip, come back. So now if you look at this slide, now it makes sense, right? Because if you're going to the other part of the world for every small thing, then of course it is going to take some time, right? Now nobody would do this on purpose, right? If someone looked at it, this data, they would definitely go back and fix it. But how do you even know that this is actually happening? I mean, you have to use some tools, right? And CDNs, meaning content delivery networks, wherein because let's say, for example, Netflix, right? Let's say if on Netflix we are watching this James Bond movie, for example. But Netflix, the office, I mean, they are basically writing and developing all their content, putting all the content in California, right? But the users of Netflix are all around the world, so they cannot ask all the users to connect to a US server and say, I will stream all the content sitting in California. Doesn't happen, which is why there is this concept of CDN. They distribute all the content across the network, across the world. They maintain servers, whichever is closer to that particular user. They have copies of that, and you just download it from there. That's CDN. Now, coming back to this example, it so happens that to do load balancing, because the number of requests increase, so CDNs do this every so often for load balancing, and they route users to a different geo because they're not able to handle the kind of usage in that particular location. So this happens when this can happen when they're getting redirected for load balancing purposes. Not just US, can be any part of the world, Russia, Australia, London, whatever, right? So that is one reason. The other reason could be that there is a misconfigured DNS. That maybe the DNS when we configured it, it was just not properly configured. And probably I should have explained this. DNS, domain name service, is basically every IP address is maps to a name, right? This maps to probably like www.google.com or facebook.com, some domain which is readable, and internally this is the address what the computer understands, and it maps to this particular IP address internally, and then goes back and looks for this particular server. All right. What's the title for the latest Bond movie? I wouldn't be able to see your answers, but at least I'll give you a few seconds to think through this. It's supposed to release very soon, right? Had there been no pandemic. Okay, now I'll not talk about pandemic. So I am sure that you guys have had enough of it, but just think through this.
Folks are adding, yeah, no time to die in the chat.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm still waiting. So the poster still says April 2020, I guess this was, if we have to do time travel to go there to watch the movie, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty excited to watch this as well. The trailer was very promising, and looking forward to check it out when it comes, whenever things get normal. All right. So why do we track? So we talked about when in the initial part we talked about conventional testing and power testing, and then we talked about CI/CD pipeline, continuous um, um testing and continuous. This is basically define a pipeline. You say CI/CD pipeline. I'll just explain for the folks for a broader understanding, right? So every time you check in, you write new features or new code, you basically want a whole bunch of actions that need to be taken, and this is that particular process that is there to define this end to end, that what needs to be done after you check in the code. Maybe you want to run a few test cases and then generate a report, and then if you find issues, then you can create a ticket, so on and so forth. Now, why do you, and when it comes to KPIs, key performance indicators, I'm sure the because this is a product, folks, I'm sure that you guys are looking at a whole bunch of KPIs. Now, why is it important to track these KPIs in the CI pipeline? So most of us are already looking at these KPIs in production, and they're already looking at like what is the login time, what is the launch time, search time in production, right? So now why do we want to track this even in CI? So this is your this is the build that basically enters your pre-release phase, right? And after it comes out, you want to make sure that all the dust is taken out, it's kind of clear and it's free from all the issues, and you're basically sending the most promising version of the app into production, right? Because ultimately, when you start seeing issues in production, the users already have a version of the app. You just can't do much, right? Now you can only do damage control by sending a new build or releasing a new build, and now the users have to upgrade to the new build, and there is a time duration that takes to basically for the new build to be adapted by all the users. I mean, it just takes time. It just doesn't happen in that particular instant of time. So anyway, coming back to this, to get value out of running your regression test suites, right? Because we are already running these regression test suites to make sure that there are no regression. But the point that is getting lost is that we are not looking at majority of us are not looking at the KPIs that we really care about pre-release, right? So now when we start looking at this, and when we say that my login time in this particular new build is increased by 5 seconds, the moment you look at that the data from that standpoint, nobody wants to release the app. I mean, there are probably new features but in the new build, but you don't want to basically send out a build that already has such kind of regressions into it, right? So which is why getting value out of these regression test suites is very important. And of course, it has visibility. So now, because once you're capturing a whole bunch of data and metrics, so you have the video network and the system level data, which helps, of course, in the root cause analysis. So you exactly know what is happening in that particular test. Where is the test case failing? What is the quality of experience like? So on and so forth. And what this also means is that you're not just improving the quality, but you're just making the life of the entire testing and development and design, the whole development life cycle is made so much more smoother, because um, it's we have seen this so, I mean, I've seen this so often that um, their QA team just says that, we found an issue, here is the screenshot, go fix it. And now, of course, the development team will come back and say, give me a recreatable test case. Which device did you test on? What was the system? What apps was running in the background? I mean, there are a whole bunch of questions that are asked. And when you already give them this kind of information and the entire snapshot, it just makes the life for them much simpler. And once they have the context, they can also come back and test on the same device. So it's just reduce the whole development life cycle. And this is another example from Emirates, right? So when you're tracking these KPIs across builds, and I don't know if you guys can see, but the KPIs that we are looking at here is launch time, time to search a flight, time to choose a flight. And now across builds, these you're basically looking at the average time, and you can now set up thresholds for each one of these KPIs when you're running your tests. And once they go above this threshold, right, so you can already get an alert, and you can just look at that particular failure, right? Because remember, when you're running at scale, you're running thousands of test cases, and you just cannot go and look at all the hundreds of failures that are happening, right? And if not thousands, there are folks who actually do that as well. But let's simplify it. It doesn't even make sense to go and look at each one of those hundreds of failures. Now, when you look at it from a KPI standpoint, you're looking at let's say the time to search, and when it goes above that threshold, what is the threshold. You just go back and look at that particular failure and or those few tests, and see what happened in those few tests. Was it a device issue? What is the network issue? Was it something to do with the code? Or was it even a client server issue? We saw the previous example, right, where the response times were really high. This is in summary, right, of what we discussed. Why, like, get value out of your regression test suites, visibility into your test cases, and then because it also, of course, reduce the whole development life cycle by giving context to both the testing and the dev team. Then finally, so here are some tricks that we have seen across customers across the globe, that really, I mean, you can just go and look it up straight away, right? So when it comes to network performance, so we are all concerned about user experience, which is very important, right? But to come to that user experience and provide better experience to customers, as I said, it's not a one size fits all, and a whole bunch of things ultimately add up to good user experience. So if you look at this, reuse existing TCP connections. This is TCP is a protocol which basically is making connections to basically download your data onto the device, or search your like search flights, whatever, right? So API requests, download content. So ultimately they are doing TCP connections to establish to the server, and then they download their HTTP requests. Now, what happens is when people are developing, so there are every new request that goes to a server, there is a new TCP connection that is established. This can get technical, but I'll try to make it simple. But every time there's a new TCP connection, or basically a connection to the server, what this means is there is a round trip. We saw that, right, from India to US. So it's just physics, that if you have to go from your phone to a server, it just takes time. And instead of going to the server and establishing a connection, you already know that it's a trusted user, and you just reuse the existing secure connection. So that will reduce a whole bunch of round trips. This is again domain sharding. You would have seen, right? For example, if you take, I'm just giving you a random example. Let's say www.headspin.io, www.tpf.headspin.io, www. I mean, jamesbond.headspin.io, whatever. So these are different domains, but it is still Headspin URLs. So each time we are connecting to a new domain, that means that it has to do a DNS lookup. We talked about DNS, right? It has to resolve it into an IP address, and it has to give you the IP address, and then you know which server it's connecting to. And that's again round trips to the server. It's expensive. So you just use the same domain and just use a different endpoint. Unoptimized resources, this is very, very common, right? PNGs are used, whereas someone can use a JPEG or a WebP, and text that is downloaded onto the devices. So there is, you can always zip it and use some sort of a zip like gzip to compress the data. And then next is CDN. We talked about CDN, right? So where you have to distribute the content, use a good enough CDN that has distribution where your users are present and your content is closer to where the end users are there, which reduces the time to the server. I mean, this is again physics. There's nothing else. So where the data has to be closer to where the end users are. Cache control, I mean, we know that if there is no round trip to the server, it's faster. So cache it. So there are different types of caching. So you can cache it on the device and save round trips to the server. And then also we took the example of Netflix. Remember, the data is the video that you want to stream is actually sitting probably in their HQ in the US, but you can always cache it on a close enough server in India, and so that the users in India can access the content through a local server that is sitting in India. So what does this ultimately mean? Is that all these things ultimately add up to these loading animations that you see, the spinning wheel of death, blank pages, low frame rate, ultimately leads to poor user experience, right? So to counter a whole bunch of these, once you start implementing each of these, you'll start seeing a great reduction and, of course, an amazing user experience. So with that, thank you so much, and probably we can open up the floor for questions.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Rohit. Amazing session, and glad that you brought up so many real world examples. Super helpful for everyone, especially understanding technicalities of it. And I'm sure a lot of them will be binging on Bond movies over the weekend now.
I'm sure.
Awesome. We have lots of interesting questions with us, and I'll kickstart with the question, and then Shalini and I will just alternate with them. Uh, so first question is someone's a new PM, which I'm assuming a lot of the audience members are. What are good ways they could get started with identifying performance bottlenecks or performance challenges, right? Because this might not be intuitive for someone who's just getting started in their careers in product management. So what are some tips and tricks for folks who are young, getting started, and want to identify performance bottlenecks and uh, give a kickstart to their product?
See, that's a great question. And in fact, the easiest way that I would suggest is first to kickstart, as I said, to start looking at these metrics even before the app goes into production. And some of the tools that I would say is, um, like, first of all, look at the network data and do analysis. Of course, there are like a whole bunch of things. You can use Charles proxy to look at network data for doing more in-depth analysis. So someone can use an Android Studio. I'm not selling Headspin, but you could of course use Headspin. But the other thing is, you could use for pre-release testing. You could use, as I said, and for Apple, you could use Xcode. So there are a whole bunch of tools for pre-release testing.
Awesome, thanks. Shalini, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, yeah. So the next question is, it's just 1 second. The screen is stuck. Yeah, so the next question is any books or videos to learn technical aspects for user experience?
I would say, see, the simplest way is to, from my standpoint, is there are a whole bunch of articles on Google for where they write about user experience, and of course, you can look at. We also talk a lot about user experience and where do you get started when it comes to testing and quality of experience. So I would say go start simple and start with the basics, which is to understand what are these key, like list down, like let's say 3 or 4 KPIs that are important, and see how do you get to that data pre-release.
Awesome. So the next one is so this is the most supported question in the Q&A tab. Any insights on A/B testing? I know this is slightly different from what you spoke about,
Mhm.
but in comparison to power testing and the other ways of testing that you mentioned, how does A/B testing stack up, and how do you suggest folks to go by it?
So when it comes to A/B testing, it's actually very important. I've seen, and this is something which I've seen customers do, and and this is an example with a customer where they had a tab with which was green and it could be purple, and they didn't know which was going to work, and there was a whole discussion that was happening, and I was right there, and they were telling us that we don't know which is going to work, but there is a whole bunch of discussion happening in the company that should we make it this color or the other color, because each one has their own preferences. So what they did is they actually got a tool where you can get a lot of A/B testing tools where you can define the percentage of this particular build and the other build, and you can distribute that build to like let's say 50% of the users, the build A and the build B, and get data. Because ultimately I can say that purple is the best, but data always speaks louder, and to answer or to come up with a justifiable answer, then you always need data, and data is what is going to convince people that this is the right way to go.
Awesome, awesome, thanks.
Yeah, so the next question is uh, how can we standardize and plan to scale up an AI platform for enterprises where most of the development is dependent on gathering the enterprise data?
So how do you, I mean, if I understand the question, how do you uh, kind of ramp up your AI algorithm to analyze the data at scale?
Right.
So, I mean, see, we also started, like, I can give you an example with Headspin, where when we started our journey to help people do analysis on top of the data that we help capture, we started with the very basics, right? What does poor user experience mean? Blank screen. So we started with a very basic and said, whenever we see this kind of this particular um, data, so we'll start tagging them as poor user experience. And then as and when we started seeing more data, so from variety of customers, so we started training the model with a whole bunch of other data metrics, and now we're able to give very actionable and pinpointed results when it comes to user experience. I would say this it's a journey that we all have to go through, and it just takes time. And data is and when we want specific data, it's going to take some time.
Yep, that's true. And I think somewhat related to this, but a slightly broader question. Any tips for managing testing at scale? I know you spoke about it a bit in your presentation as well, but since it was one of the most supported questions, anything specific that people need to keep in mind while testing at scale?
Yeah, I mean, trust me, that's a great question when it comes to testing, because when we see customers, they are all mostly testing with some local devices, and they come to us and say, now we have we are in a hyper growth stage. Now we want to test in like a whole bunch of geos and locations. And the first thought is, now we don't have people at these particular locations, which is where a cloud solution will come in, where you have a cloud device, you have a whole bunch of cloud devices, and now you can use something like an Appium or Selenium and set up your test cases, and then you can run it at scale on 100, 200,000 devices. It just scales. And Appium is built for enterprises.
Perfect, perfect.
It's an
Thanks.
open source tool. For someone who doesn't know Appium and Selenium, they're open source tools for building your automation tests. And we ourselves are huge contributors to open source community. So I would
Nice.
say even to start and to scale, um, Appium is one of the best. Like 90 plus percentage of customers use Appium.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah, so we have one last question.
Okay.
What are some of the AI models used for server side performance analytics?
So when we look at AI, what we do is we are basically looking at the data with a few with a number or threshold that we basically use as a reference, and that particular metric is there because we have looked at billions of tests. And this is from my experience, that when we look at these billions of tests, uh, there are these thresholds that we come up with, and then based on that and based on the experience, based on the location device, so we basically tell whether there is if you remember the presentation, there were situations where the wait times were high, maybe the TCP connections were high, connection time. So in each of those situations, we have basically, from all the data that we have kind of analyzed, so we are able to tell that this is beyond that particular threshold.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks a lot, Rohit. Thanks for taking the time. That's pretty much it in terms of the questions. We have lots of other questions, but I think yeah, since we are out of time, we'll have to wrap up. But is there anywhere people could reach out to you, either on LinkedIn, Twitter, or what is the best way to reach out to you? Maybe they could ask the questions directly to you post the session.
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is probably the best way, and I mean, I'm on Twitter as well, so LinkedIn is probably the easiest, and I'm also pretty active. Twitter maybe once in a way, but that's the best way to reach us. And you also have the link if you want to check out what we do at Headspin. Feel free to reach out. Happy to
For sure.
answer more questions.
For sure. Thanks a ton. So reach out to Rohit on LinkedIn and shoot out your questions that you wanted to ask him. Check out Headspin if you're looking for a testing tool at scale. And with that, we are at the end of the session. And thanks a lot for joining in and staying back right till the end. I know a lot of folks were confused about this being an Insurjo session, but this was a separate masterclass altogether. This was packed weekend for TPF and for all of you. Like we hosted a no-code workshop yesterday. This was a masterclass we had today, and tomorrow we are doing a teardown with front row. So do check that out as well. So we thought let's take it easy on Insurjo this week, and next week we have the regular sessions lined up for that as well. Uh, you might have seen that Nanda from our team had shared another event link. So we are doing that event with some Y Combinator founders. So make sure you check that out as well. So thanks everyone for joining. And if you like the session, give us a shout out on Twitter, tag Rohit, let him know you enjoyed the session. And I hope you had a great time tonight. Uh, if you want to check out the recordings later, we put it up on YouTube, so you could go ahead and subscribe to that. And with that, ending this session, see you next weekend or in Sajo. Bye bye. Take care.